Well, thank you for coming tonight. Ashley and I work for a company called UE Group. I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a second. But we thought it would be fun to get together and give you guys two very different perspectives. Give you somebody who's been in the industry for a long time, been down the corporate world, the startup world, etc., and some of the things that I've learned about doing UX work, and give you the perspective of somebody who's just come out of school. Ashley is a recent employee of ours, and bringing those insights together to give you some information that I think is really hard to come by. The theme and the title of the talk tonight is about what your mother never taught you. There's a pun in there that I don't want to get into, but it's really about things that you might find it difficult to hear about or even see in a textbook. So hopefully you'll enjoy some of that information tonight. So just to start off with, for me to get a sense of what parts of the school are really represented here, how many of you are new media students? All right. How about industrial design? All right. You guys are kind of in little pods. How about game design? All right. Okay, come on. All right. Be proud. Fashion? Anybody? Graphics? Okay, graphic design? All right. Am I missing anybody? All right. What am I missing? Advertising. All right. Get a representative there. All right, cool. So as I said, Ashley and I come at this from two different perspectives, and our hope is that by bringing all of this information together, you're going to get some unique insights. So we thought we'd start by giving you a little bit about ourselves. So let me talk a little bit about me. So I've been around since the beginning of time in terms of UX. I hail all the way to the PC revolution. I was in the Apple world for a while, and I went on to be the founder of the UX group at Netscape back in the mid-90s when the web was just taking off. And I did some hard time at Xerox PARC trying to create products out of that technology, not an easy process. And then I founded UE Group as a consultancy somewhere along the way. There's another narrative that relates to entrepreneurship and startups not necessarily worth getting into, other than I mentioned that I did a children's media company way back when, and I've done a variety of other things as well. So I come at some of the information I'm going to give you both as a hiring manager, as an executive, as an individual contributor in a variety of different tech companies. And then there's Ashley.
Hi guys, so I'm Ashley. I just joined UE Group recently. I've been working with them as an intern since May, but I became a full-time employee recently. And basically for them, I do everything design. Since this is a small company, we as designers have to work in a lot of different kinds of medias and kind of just spread ourselves everywhere, which can be a lot of fun, I think. So while I'm there, I do industrial design and interface design, but kind of go other places as needed. And I've now graduated, so that's kind of the perspective that I can give to you guys as recent graduates. So any kind of questions that you might have, or ways that I can kind of tell you the difference between what college tells you and the real world out there. So that's kind of the role I'll be playing.
All right. Although college is part of the real world, but
well, yes, but the professional world.
Okay, that's different. Okay, so just to give you a sense of what we physically look like, this is just some peeks into our office space. We have a design space where right now our consultancy of about 12, although we have an extended set of professionals that we work with as well. One of the things that's interesting about us is we have some really specialized research labs that are integrated into our facility, where we do a lot of research on the designs that we do in a very iterative fashion, and I'll talk about that. One of the interesting things about us is, although we're a small company, we've been able to attract a lot of top companies. We've also done a lot of work for startups as well, and we've confronted a lot of design challenges. Since this is an art school and perhaps you might want to get a sense of what our design looks like, thought we'd start by showing you some of our work, and then what this will evolve into is what we describe as some truths about UX that I think are difficult to come by. So just to show you some of our recent design work, this is, we really work hard to push the envelope in a lot of designs. This was our reinvention of a career exploration tool on the web that allows you to take your LinkedIn profile and see how your qualifications match up to industries. And this was a direct reflection of research that we did where people generally hated, once they'd graduated from school, to go back and get more education and take courses, etc. This tool allowed people to explore their careers in a visual way and see some of the obstacles that were ahead of them to get them where they wanted to go. So we have a joke around the office where we say, hey, it's not exactly brain surgery, but the fact is we have worked on brain surgery user interfaces, and this is one of them. This is actually a design that allows a surgeon to view the electromagnetic fields of electrodes that are driven into the brain. And the idea is for Parkinson's patients, if you stimulate a part of the brain, you can actually stop the tremors completely. And also on the medical front, this is an interface we did for computer-assisted surgery, which is where you can see parts of the anatomy and surgical tools in 3D space and be able to navigate them. This is recent design reinventing the notion of how you view narratives in cybersecurity situations and how you slice and dice it in some whole new ways. And just to show you some recent mobile app designs, it's related to automotive, and this is more of the fashion and e-commerce-y kind of space. And lastly, in terms of some of the industrial design work, we do have in-house industrial design. This is actually wearables related to surgical procedures, and these are just some other devices. The tablet that you see up here and its coloration actually predated the iPad, believe it or not. We did a tablet design before the iPad was around for a company that unfortunately couldn't completely master their technology. The display was based out of was made out of polymer rather than silicone, and ultimately it wasn't able to get together. So that's just to give you a little bit of a sense of some of our design work and what it looks like. So what we're here to talk about is the fact that UX is a tremendous challenge, no matter how you slice it. I think both from the point of view of, I think, charting a really good career in the field to the disciplines involved. And one of the things we did with this presentation is intermix some segments from TV and movies that remind us of some of the challenges confronting UX. So here's your first one. This is actually Jim Carrey from In Living Color, I think, with a little sequence that captures some of the realities in dealing with UX. Uh-oh, did that not play? Play, damn it.
Who would like to attack me?
Oh, me. I got one in my purse.
Why don't you try?
This is a real knife.
Don't worry about it, grasshopper.
I don't know. I don't think I should.
It's okay, come on!
Oh, my God. I'm really sorry. Oh, I didn't mean it. Are you all right?
I'm fine. I shifted my internal organs to avoid the knife. However, like a lot of beginning students, you attacked me wrong.
Oh.
You're supposed to come at me like this. Remember that and try it again.
Okay. Downward thing.
So in the nature of UX, it's always the user's fault, whether it's for developers, the designers, you name it. Everything's great until you actually involve humans. Anyway, that little segment reminded me of that reality. So as I said, the theme of the talk is things that you may not hear very often, and some of the things that we have to say maybe are going to be controversial, but that's the whole point. Otherwise, you would have heard this all the time. And so we've collected what we consider to be a collection of truths about UX. And hopefully some of these will continue to resonate after this evening and will give you something to think about. So let's start with the first truth. And the first truth is that people can't tell you what they want. And this is a mistake that a lot of designers make. I think a lot of designers are bought into doing research, and we'll talk more about that, and going out and talking to actual users. But there seems to be an expectation that these users are going to tell you exactly what they want. And unfortunately, people don't know how to articulate what they want. They're not designers, they're not technologists. And often what comes out of that process is actually a lot of misleading information. So I would say the way that I would describe the problem is simply that doing interviews doesn't cut it. And when I see a lot of student portfolios and they talk about their designs, what they talk about is doing interviews with users. And as I said, there's a much better way to really get a sense of what people do, and that's to simply observe them. So let me show you some examples of observation that we've done, and also examples of how some of that observation translated directly into a product design. So this is a video we produced for launch day for the PS4. And one of the challenges we had was to understand opportunities for console launches in the future. And rather than, there was a lot of talk about approaching it in the form of surveys in terms of doing interviews, et cetera, et cetera. And what we decided to do was actually go out on launch night and hang out in line with the actual people waiting. And we followed it up by actually paying some people to follow them home, as scary as that is. And actually watched them unpack the system for the first time and saw what application they played, how long they stayed up, and everything else. But let me show you a little segment of the video of actually being in line on launch day. If it plays.
We came here at 7 a.m., 7 in the morning, so we're a little tired. It's been over, how long has it been?
Too long.
15 hours?
Yeah,
maybe?
way too long.
I'm so
Been too long.
tired, but yeah, gotta get the release.
I got Killzone, Assassin's Creed, Call of Duty, and then I'm gonna get Battlefield on Black Friday. And I'm set. I got all my controllers because me and my roommates want to play games, and I'm gonna get the camera. As soon as I get home, I'm gonna plug it in, I'm gonna turn it on, see if it works, and I'm going to sleep.
When I came here, there was more girls here than guys, and they were all waiting for their boyfriends.
He plays Madden. Mine plays Call of Duty. He gets angry. He yells and he cuts them. He gets angry at Madden. And I'm like, Josh, it's just a game. He's like, it's not just a game. I'm like, what? It's really just a game. We get ignored a lot. Dude, it's a hype for real.
We conducted focus groups, and this is one of the, I think one of the, where research really adds a lot of value to the design is where you begin to see themes coming from different directions and not just one. So when we conducted focus groups, we asked people to design their ideal PC. So this is one of the creations. And you see at the top it's got a thermometer showing how hot it's running. It's got flames, painted on the side. It actually has exhaust pipes with flames shooting out at the top, okay? And there's that ubiquitous fan smack in the middle, right? So when we were thinking about how to, what this design needed to be about, we had no idea about this whole idea of heat and lights and everything else. That was something that came directly from observation, and had we sat there and asked people what they wanted in terms of, what kind of PC needed to be constructed, they wouldn't necessarily be able to articulate it that way. So I wanted to show you 3 generations of designs that Dell produced as a result of this finding. There wasn't time to change the case right away, so they did a special edition that had flame painted on it, so that started to speak to the heat. The generation after that introduced lit fans, both on the laptop and on the desktop, and they introduced a cooling system that had its own lights as well. And then the generation after that, you can see the clear panels on the outside, and you can select which LED color you pick because it forms the basis of personal identity. So you don't want too many purples in the same room, for example. So this is an example of where that direct observation directly influenced a design. All right? And in our mind, being able to iterate on these designs is a really important discipline when you're moving a user experience forward. One of the techniques that we use is usability testing. Is it up there? And is it playing? Yes. So I'm sure some of you have been exposed to usability testing. It is not playing. This thing gives me a hard time. So the thing is, research of this type doesn't need to be expensive. It doesn't need to involve a big lab, but it can be done really, really badly. Okay? You can do a lot of work and talk to a lot of people and produce gaga. So a little clip that I came across from, I think you'll recognize these folks, that really captures how nonsensical research data can be, is this little guy here.
Good evening. Tonight's Spectrum looks at one of the major problems in the world today. The whole vexed question of what is going on. Is there still time to confront it, let alone solve it, or is it too late? What are the figures? What are the facts? What do people mean when they talk about things? Alexander Hardacre of the Economic Affairs Bureau.
In this graph, this column represents 23% of the population. This column represents 28% of the population, and this column represents 43% of the population.
Telling figures indeed. Well, what do they mean to you? What do they mean to me? What do they mean to the average man in the street? With me now is Professor Tiddles of Leeds University. Professor, you spent many years researching into things. What do you think?
I think it's too early to tell.
Too early to tell? Too early to say. It means the same thing. The word say is the same as the word tell. They're not spelt the same, but they mean the same. It's an identical situation we have with ship and boat, but not the same as we have with bow and bow. They're spelt differently, mean different things, but sound the same. But the real question remains, what is the solution, if any, to this problem? What can we do? What am I saying? Why am I sitting in this chair? Why am I on this programme? And what am I going to say next? Here to answer this is a professional cricketer.
I can say nothing at this point.
Well, you were wrong, Professor. Come on. Hello. So, where do we stand? Where do we stand? Where do we sit? Where do we come? Where do we go? What do we do? What do we say? What do we eat? What do we drink? What do we think? What do we do?
Well, anyway, so the point is, just doing research doesn't mean that you're going to get any kind of valuable information. It's really about how you structure the research that you do in advance of a design, and really aiming at understanding the whys and not the whats. There's a lot of tools out there like usertesting.com, etc. I would argue that the way some of those work is really about understanding the whats and not really understanding the whys. And without getting down to the motivations, it often really can't provide a lot of guidance for the designs you're working on. So, and that comes down to how you pose the questions, what the questions are, and in particular, you need to realize that when you're doing it with friends and family, you're going to get extremely biased information. People like to please, and people that you know in any way, through any association, are going to want to make you happy. That's a wonderful thing about humanity. But in the process, they're not going to give you an honest view of whether your product or your design is really good and it's really something. They'll be really polite. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. They'll never use it in a million years because, they're just saying that because they want to make you happy. See it all the time. The reality is, sadly, that people lie. And people lie for a variety of reasons. It's not because they're being bad. It's actually because they're being good. They don't want to make you feel bad. In some cases, it's because they don't want to look stupid. And their ego is such that they don't want to say to you, wow, that was really difficult. I would never understand that in a million years. So, when we do our usability testing, we'll see somebody who will struggle with a product for 20 minutes trying to do this one thing. And we'll ask them to do a rating from 1 to 7, where 7 is the best. And they'll say 7. And the reason simply is that they don't want to come across as having not been able to figure that out. So, all right. So here's another truth. It's kind of a tough one, maybe, which is, when you're doing these designs, there's a lot of empathy that you're putting into it, but you can't expect that empathy to be reciprocated. So what that means is, especially if you're going into a startup situation and you see yourself as an entrepreneur, the people that you're going to be servicing don't really care very much about all of the hard work that you put into it. They don't care about your business plan. They don't care how long you stayed up. They don't care about the amazing deals that you've done and haven't done, and why the way you're doing a certain thing is so much better than the status quo. They don't care. All they care about is whether it makes something more convenient for them, it makes them happier, it entertains them. And you need to realize that although from a user experience standpoint, you have to put a lot of empathy into the design, you can't expect any empathy back. That's just the reality of it. So when you're putting out a new product into the world, part of a lot of people don't realize, especially when it's something new, is that when you're dealing with people, you have to produce something that's so compelling, so amazing, that's going to get them to do some of the things that they want to do the least in their lives. Like change. People hate change. They hate doing things differently. And then when you think about forcing them to change and opening up their wallets and giving you money, think about what it takes for you to do that, right? That you actually change your routine of your life and you're willing to pay somebody in the process. When you put out a new product or service, you're basically asking people to go through that change. And unless you achieve a really high degree of value and excitement and emotion around the design, you just can't achieve it. And that's why so many applications and why so many websites just don't make it. They never reach that volume. Intellectually, it's great, but it can't achieve a point where people are willing to change their lives, because that's really what's required and what you're asking of them. So in many respects, when we're talking about really good user experience, we're really talking about managing people's behavior. And it's in many respects one of the best ways of thinking about it. You need to, through art, through design, through feelings, through logic, touch people in a way where you literally impact their behavior. So here's another interesting issue, which is that within an organization, designers, if you go into a larger environment or even certain startups, you're not always seen as, you can be seen as a foe as much as you can be seen as a partner. And one of the reasons is I feel like designers don't put enough work into making people understand what their role is and the value that they bring to the equation. And beyond that, I think it has a lot to do with the language that's selected. So you hear designers talking about, oh yes, this is a user-centered, empathic approach to, doing your laundry, or, some kind of description like that. where the people that they're working with are talking about things in terms of economic terms. They're talking about it in terms of technological terms. And a lot of designers don't put enough work into understanding the language of their internal customers and presenting themselves in that language. So this is a little clip from Three Amigos, which is a movie that I think captures how UX designers sometimes come across in organizations, even though they don't intend to.
My little buttercup has the sweetest smile. Dear little buttercup, won't you stay a while? Come with me where moonbeams paint the sky, and you and I might linger in the sweet by and by. Oh, dear little buttercup, with your eyes so blue. Oh, little buttercup, you're a dream come true. You and I will settle down in a cottage built for two. Dear little buttercup, I love you. Everybody! My little buttercup has the sweetest... Yes, ma'am. Dear little buttercup, won't you stay a while? You and I will settle down in a cottage built for two. Dear little buttercup, sweet little buttercup, my little buttercup, I love you.
So I've seen many a presentation by a UX designer that goes down just like that, believe it or not, without the music. But basically the audience reaction is just what you saw. And I think largely the reason is because not enough work was put into, again, finding a common language for the audience. So another truth is that the designs in a commercial setting are all about trade-offs. And one of the tools that we make that we use to help provide some insights into those trade-offs is instead of it being a focus group, it's a group ideation session where we give people exercises whereby they have to make some of the same trade-offs that designers need to make. So what you see there in the foreground are volumes, and they're given a physical budget. The volumes actually represent complexity and features of a specific product, and they have to make it work within a certain size. And one of the things we often have people do is design something that works for them and then force them to come up with a compromise that works for all of them. And this provides a lot of insights into the trade-offs that need to be made in design every day. But even through this process, one of the things that I also see is just apathy that takes over the design process after a while. So this is a little video of that captures the true apathy. This is from Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Probably not a lot of movie you have seen.
Look at the giant tomato, Martha.
I didn't know they grew them so big, Jeff.
I wonder where he's going. He got little Timmy.
Poor Timmy.
He ate him all up.
Anyway. All right. So another truth is, now more than ever, design is really an international issue. And some of the things that you're going to be designing are really going to have a wide ranging reach and impact. One of the truths is that Americans in particular are not particularly visually literate people. And you can see it in a lot of different ways. Parking sign is a good example of a very text-oriented view of the world versus a very graphical-oriented view of the world. And when you get into aesthetics, something like this ad for a bank in Japan, isn't something that you would expect to see in the U.S. But likewise, the American aesthetics will look just as alien. So just to show you some examples of how these cultural aesthetics really permeate designs, and we could spend all night talking about this. When you look at the tradition of Japanese heraldry, for example, and its relation to branding and some of the designs that you see in Japanese aesthetics, and you compare that to European aesthetics that are the equivalent. So you've got the basis of the shield, which turns into heraldry, and you see it coming into a lot of other different places in the culture. It creates an expectation of what a normal look is. And it's important to realize that there's a lot of biases that if you've grown up in the U.S. and spent most of your life here, there are biases in terms of colors and shapes that you're putting into your designs that really don't pan out internationally. And especially when you start using hands and the body, you're really getting into a lot of trouble. So this particular gesture could mean, what does this mean to folks in the audience? Somebody throw out a word. It means what? Dumb. Okay. What? Wait. Mm-hmm. Pansy. All right. It can also mean money. Exactly. Mm-hmm. 10. Tense. Sell? All right, we'll cover this later. It can also mean fear. So let me show you a symbol from Japan. Anybody read Japanese in the audience? All right. If you do, you have to not shout it out. But this was a sign at what I can tell you is that it was for the entrance at a bathhouse in Japan. Any guesses what this sign means? No tattoos, okay. No clothing, okay, because you got the body. Yeah. No women, okay. Yeah, it could also be no geishas, right? So all of those things in a way are true, but the real meaning of this is no gangsters. Because they're covered with tattoos, typically involving traditional Japanese figures. So this is a sign that says that the Yakuza is not welcome in this bathhouse. And this is an example of where you may have come up with a design that's communicating any of the number of things that you said, and it may have unintended meanings in other cultures. And it's really important when you think about doing a design that you know is going to have a worldwide audience that you look into it. So here's one from the US. What does this sign mean? This is from the state of Texas. What is it? 2 people at a time. Okay, that's a good guess. Restroom, exactly. 2P, go here. So, needless to say, this is something that won't work internationally, okay? It doesn't even work here. All right. So another point is, and this is true heresy, right? Sometimes good design really doesn't matter, and you need to be aware of that. And sometimes this is where, especially in a startup context, this issue really comes to the fore. And the reason, or the context in which it doesn't matter, is when it's really the first mover in a specific area, or it's the only solution that's available, you know. And I've seen a lot of designers have arguments with developers, etc., about, yeah, this is really going to matter, and it's going to drive acceptance and everything else. Sometimes that's really not true. People will adopt something if it's the only one available, if it really solves a problem that they have. You know, I don't think, you know, some of the most popular websites, you know, Facebook, etc., they've come a long way, but I would never describe them as amazing examples of usability, for example. You know, so it's important to realize that. Okay, and this is my last point before I turn it over to Ashley. And it relates to the job selections that you're going to make heading into the future. And as I've said, I've hired a lot of people over the years. I've been in a variety of roles. And one of the things that I would say to you is you really need to think strategically about the jobs that you take and how you're evolving as a designer. And one of the ways that I think about it is how you're pacing yourself, how you're building your skills and your capabilities up over a measure of time. I think there's this immediate feeling coming out of school for immediate gratification. You want to jump to the top of the pyramid right away. But I think there's a lot of downsides to that, some of which, to be honest, include just sheer boredom. If you start tackling certain problems, where do you go from there? You know, if you've achieved some of those things, or at least in your own mind, right off the bat. There's a lot of smart decisions that you can make about how you evolve as a designer over time, and you really craft a long career. So some of the possibilities, coming out of school that you have, all have a lot of pros and cons, and just to touch on a few. So in terms of startups, obviously startups have a lot of excitement and pizzazz about them. They have a lot of possibilities, but it's important to realize that it's just that, it's possibilities. You just have to look at the statistics of how many actually make it and how many don't. I personally have a folder at home that has a bunch of stock certificates that we call our placemat folder. Really provides evidence of that. But one of the things in particular that I think a lot of people coming out of school run into with startups is when they are lone wolves. Basically, they go into a company and they're the only designer. And part of what you really need to consider is, how are you going to grow? How are you going to collaborate with other people to develop your skills? And if you are a lone wolf, how are you going to evolve in that organization? Are you always going to be the lone wolf? Because you're not in marketing, you're not in development, there isn't really a thick design organization, so where are you going to go? And what quite often happens is a designer will go in, they'll do their thing, they last about a year, and then they go looking for a place where they can grow a lot more than they're growing in that environment. So that's some of the stuff to think about. So in the corporate world, there are some really cool things about it. There's a lot of resources available in the corporate world. Socially, there's a ton of people, which is really cool. Some of the downsides are that you can often be a small wheel in a really, really giant machine, both in the local organization that you're in and in the organization overall. But, not all groups in corporations are made the same, and it's important for you to understand how many of your peers are going to be there, what the plans are, etc. But like everything, it has its pros and cons. And lastly, smaller firms that you can go into, they don't have the resources of big corporations. They don't necessarily have the crazy hours of a startup either. So they offer their own benefits. So it's just something for you to think about. I really encourage you to not just dive knee-deep into whatever the current fashion is, to really think about where you want to go with your career and what choice, the next step is going to get you closest to your ultimate goal. And I think initially it's really important for you to take steps that are going to allow you to grow significantly. And for perspectives on being new to the industry, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley. And just tell me when to advance, or do you want to just push that? All right, okay.
All right, guys, so I'm basically going to go through and tell you my own thoughts of these truths that I've found have been like new discoveries as I've been more and more exposed to the industry. I just graduated in December, so I am as fresh as it gets, basically, to the industry. So hopefully I'll be able to give you guys a good perspective on what it's like and what you can be expecting in the next, I don't know, however long you're here. So starting off, so you are hired from your portfolio. I'm sure you guys have all heard a whole bunch about how important portfolios are. But it really is true. I've recently had the opportunity to be on the other side of portfolio reviews, where I was looking through other people's and looking to see who was a good candidate for a job. And it's a very eye-opening experience, because all of a sudden, all of the work that you put into it isn't as important. You're flipping through a lot of them. And so it really becomes about standing out. And the best way, I think, to stand out is by really determining what sets you apart and having a full argument kind of set up in your head about what that is and making your portfolio communicate that. A lot of people use portfolios just to show their work, but it's a lot more than that. You're selling yourself with all the diverse things that you can do, and also kind of painting a picture of who you are. So I encourage everybody to kind of set that argument up and think about what it is that makes you special as a designer and what's your unique perspective. And then take it a step farther and do what major companies do and kind of come up with a brand for yourself, including a tagline. Be clever or stupid or whatever, but something that sums you up and gets people's attention, because this kind of stuff is what's going to make you memorable. On top of that, I say you should really inject your personality into your portfolio, because when people are looking to hire you, it's not just about what you can do, it's about who you are as a person, because no one wants to work with somebody who is not like them, right? I mean, companies have their own unique environment that they're trying to feed into when they hire new people. So they want to find somebody who fits them. And by making your portfolio really speak to you as a person, it's going to make it stand out more, and it's going to make people more excited about it if it's aligned with their company. So I suggest choosing 3 descriptive words and modeling your portfolio after that. This example I have here is actually my own website that I recently created, and my words that I chose were creative, serious, and approachable. So the ways that I went about achieving that was through my color choices and through my images and all of that, which you guys are, I'm sure, very familiar with. I don't need to go through it. But by doing these kind of things, it gives you a very different feel. So other people in the industry may have chosen other words, and it gives you a very different kind of portfolio that says a lot more. So you could go a lot of different ways with it, and it's a lot more attention-getting than just images of your work. Next is a pretty obvious one. People are people. But when it comes down to it, in interviews or when you're working in the field, it's pretty easy to get intimidated, especially when you're new. And it's easy to be like afraid of all of the titles around you and the experience around you. So when you're in a meeting or in an interview or working with a client, with a CEO of a company, or even just a lead designer, it's easy to be intimidated to where you maybe won't say your true point of view or your true perspective. But I really encourage you to actively participate, because that's what you're hired for and that's what people are looking for. People are just people, and everybody is approachable and easy to talk to. And people will respond best to that. So it's best to just shake off those nerves and intimidations and just go for it and be yourself and say what you have to say about the design world or whatever it is that you're talking about at the moment, because that's what people are going to respond to best. For my next truth, you will be hired for a fresh perspective. It's a common misconception that we're all just cheap labor, right? I mean, that's what a lot of people think when it comes to coming out of school, that they're looking for an entry-level person, and since you don't have much experience, you're cheap and it gets the job done. But that's not really what the honest truth is in the industry. Normally, when it comes to hiring people out of college, it's because they want a fresh perspective. They want somebody who's going to shake up the stale organization they have now. And that's something that we can all do. We're not tainted by industry standards or by being dragged down with the world around us, basically. It's a fresh perspective. And even though that comes with not maybe being the most experienced and not knowing everything, companies can like that because it allows you to be moldable into what they're looking for. So we are in great demand, and I just like to remind people of that because it can be a little scary going into these rooms with a bunch of these people that have a lot more experience, but you offer your own benefits as well. So I say challenge the people around you and really go for it and say what you are thinking as a designer, because you're qualified to think what you think and say what you have to say. On the flip side of that, just reminding people that, yeah, you don't know everything, but that's true of everybody. Even the CEO of Google doesn't know everything. And it's important for us all to remember that and get feedback early and often. Some of the main roadblocks, I would say, to getting feedback, and this is stuff that I've just seen working already in the field, is sometimes people don't get feedback because they're afraid of failure. And this is like the worst thing you could do, basically, because you're just going to drown in your own problem. And what ends up happening is because you're not asking for help or asking questions or asking for feedback, people are going to be like, oh, what's taking so long with this? And then your result isn't as good. And it's like, oh, they spent all that time, and so the judgment is not positive on you. The other side is being overly confident and thinking that your design is the best thing ever and it's your baby and nothing anyone could say is right about it. And that's also as detrimental as being afraid of failure, because really what you want is to get other people's feedback, and that is going to challenge what you're thinking. It's going to help you grow as a designer, and it's really going to improve your work overall and other people's. So the next truth I have is that every time you speak, people are forming an opinion. And that can be kind of a scary statement, but really you should look at it as an opportunity. Every meeting and presentation you have that you're showing your work, you really need to think of it as selling what you've done. It's important to think of the positives and that your goal or that your project is meeting and the goals that it's set out to meet, because when you're communicating your designs, it's easy to get lost with what you're trying to say and miss the main message. And you need to be able to sell it in a way with confidence and with a targeted point, so that the people that you're talking to can take away from that meeting what you really need to say. And it seems so basic, but it's actually something that a lot of people struggle with. And it can be very detrimental to people's work. And this is something I've seen happen with people that have been working for years in the industry, but they still do it. So examples of this would be, like, I thought that this might be cool, but it could be done these other ways. That's not putting much confidence in the person that you're working for, that you've really thought through all of the decisions and that this decision is the best way to do. So I say don't say that. Instead, say things like, this is cool because of these reasons, and it's better than these other things because of reason A, B, and C. That's a much stronger story to tell. And that's how you really need to think about all of these presentations and meetings that you'll have, is it really is a story and it's a selling point. So even though it's just words and a little adjustments here and there, it makes all the difference on how people perceive what you've done.
All right, back to me. I'm going to bring it home now and give you your last couple of truths. And one of them is that really has to do with expectations when you go out there. That a lot of designers view it as a point of failure if the 100% of their idea hasn't been adopted. And the fact is that you have to be satisfied with both the influence and the impact of your actual design. And sometimes something that doesn't seem very exciting can actually come across as something really impactful. Let me show you some designs that not very exciting, but I think we've produced really beautiful results. So this is where we started from. This was a logistical tracking software. This is a piece of software that tracks all the containers and all the ships that come across the ocean. Not too exciting, right? So this is the before, and this is the after. where we really brought the data to life and produced a presentation that not only allowed it to be actionable, but I think it was something that's beautiful in some ways. This is another piece of software we worked on that lets you manage PBX networks for phones. Not very exciting either, but this was what came out of our design effort. Something that not only is really functional, but really compelling for people. This was a analytics package for IBM as part of some of their cloud services. This is the before, and this is the after. Okay, and some of the stuff we've done has included reinventing things like classified ads. Over there on the right, you see that cloud. That particular design came out of the finding from our research that nobody is looking for the average. Everybody's looking for outliers. Everybody wants the car that costs the least, that has the least mileage. They don't want the car that costs average and has the average mileage. Nobody is ever looking for that car. And so we came up with tools that allow you to easily identify the data that people are actually looking for. So here's one of the biggest things I want you to walk away with today. Okay, you ready for this truth? This is the biggie, okay? It's earth-shattering. That in my experience, ego is the ultimate product and design killer. And it's usually both either a result of the designer, the people that are doing the development, or production, or both. It's the ultimate killer. And if you're dealing with a startup situation, it's especially true of founders. This is my last little movie video clip I'm going to show you that captures the fact that I think sometimes in startups people create literally monsters, the products that are just absolutely awful, but they refuse to accept that it's as bad as it is, and they just have to make something come out of it. So I think most of you are familiar with the famous scene in Alien where the monster comes out of the chest. You guys must be familiar with that scene. Okay, well, this is the Spaceballs version of that same scene that I think captures this monster to making something entertaining come out of it.
What did he order?
Oh, he had a special.
That's what I ordered. Change my order to the soup.
Good move.
Oh, no. Not again.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal. Send me a kiss by wire. Baby, my heart's on fire. If you refuse me, honey, you lose me. Then you'll be left alone. Oh, baby, telephone and tell me I'm your own.
Check, please.
Anyway, okay. That's the last thing I'll subject you to. So let me show you, I'm going to do a really quick power case study that show you an actual project we did for a startup and how it ultimately failed, in spite of all of our best efforts as UX professionals. So we came into this company, it was going to reinvent personal wellness, and it had a device that people activity measure. This actually predated the Fitbit and some of those devices. So this is brand spanking new. They had this kind of working prototype. They had some really funky ideas with these serum bottles as the user interface for how healthy you were, and it wasn't clear whether these are like hypodermic medicine bottles or milk bottles or whatever these things were. But they were really enamored with this, but they had gotten the feedback that it really wasn't going to work. So we actually went on site to people's homes, and we conducted focus groups. We did tons of usability testing. So we went into the homes and we explored form factors for the devices, brought a lot of existing ones, possible new ones. We went into clubs and understood people who really took wellness really seriously and some of the tools that they used. We identified, relationships between different kinds of groups and some of their goals, etc. And we came up with key findings about how they needed to feel good, how it needed to make them feel successful, highly personalized experience. We defined the whole series of personas. We came up with some really early concepts. Don't look at those; they're pretty bad. Their reaction was initially, well, we kind of liked the general direction. Even though people wanted a mobile solution for their phones, they didn't really want to pursue that. But they questioned the feedback that we had gotten from going and doing all these observations. So we created a whole series of focus groups past that, where people expressed all of their desires for this kind of wellness. We got reactions to those concepts, identified the features that they wanted the most, designed a whole series of prototypes, got people to vote on which ones they would want to use and carry in their bodies, including the models, looked at all of that statistically. When it came to the site, we designed something that, based on a lot of the learning that we did, for example, this site is all calls to action. It has no blah, 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 blah in it at all. It's all meant to achieve affinity. We did testing with the imagery for the site, just to point out why some of these failed the way they did. The site on the right was considered creepy because there was some kind of age disparity there that people didn't want to deal with. The one on the left, those people look too healthy. They would never look like that. That's not going to work. They liked the one in the middle because they were happy and they wore baggy clothes just like they did. So that was like the imagery that really resonated with them. And we designed, this is results from the usability testing where we tested the heck out of all the parts inside, and we really proved that this was the design that really people really wanted. So what do you think they decided as a company? They decided to go with this because the founder really liked his bottles, and he thought that that was really going to work. So they went out to market after having spent all of that money. A few months later, they called us up, and they said, hey, it's failing miserably. We don't know why. We're going to give up on the consumer market. We want to go to B2B now. We want to go into businesses. So they basically said, can you come and do the project all over again for B2B customers? So we went out again. I'm not going to take you through the whole thing. We went out into businesses. We spent time with people in corporate settings. We did more focus groups. We wound up at a slightly different place with the design. It turned out that the corporate users were really suspicious of data that was going to be retained by the company, and they felt like this illustrated style was something they were a lot more comfortable with. And we spent a ton of time coming up with just the right illustrated style and the complexions of the people and etc., right down to the characters and the award mechanism inside. And so we designed this whole new corporate wellness site. What do you think they went with? They went back to the bottles because the founder was really stuck on his bottles. So what ultimately happened? The team was canned. They basically closed down because nobody wanted to use this site. And so all the information was there, all the work was done, and it was somebody's ego that ultimately completely destroyed this, and they would have been ahead of the market, ahead of Fitbit, ahead of everybody. And this is just one of many examples where ego really becomes the all-almighty destroyer. So just last thought before I open it up for questions, which is you guys are really fortunate. You have a really important job and role in your future. You're going to influence people's lives directly and indirectly. It's something you should really be proud of, and I hope it's a craft that you take really seriously in your career. And so with that, we are going to open it up to questions both online and here. So any questions in the room? And if you have a question, please step up to the microphone and ask any question that you may have. Don't be shy. It's only us. Happy to answer any question.
So if we want, we can start with one online if that makes it easier while you guys are gathering your thoughts. So Alexis Britt asked us, at what point do you see your informational architecture user flows to be complete before testing? Do you find you spend more time developing that flow, or is it best to get others' eyes on it and see what needs to be adjusted following that testing? So normally, at least from the projects I've been involved in, what we've done is, depending on the scope of the project, of course, we do a couple iterations and do a beginning kind of testing session. And with that, we get just very overarching feedback about the concepts and what elements of the concept they like. From there, we develop those areas further and fully define that task flow and do multiple rounds of testing after that, depending how much basically the clients pay for. So, but we go through iterations and use the user testing at different elements or different times of the process to get different answers.
So maybe just to add on to that, we typically, when we're talking about the web or we're talking about a mobile app, we really think of it as a framework that we need to design first. So we design from the outside in, start with overall navigation to content, and we like to put it in front of ourselves in wireframe form almost immediately. We have a pretty robust internal review process, and if the project scope allows, we put it in front of users in wireframe form as well. So we have interactive prototypes that are still wireframes. We've done it as paper prototypes in the past, but it's just as easy for us to make them clickable, and we use those and go from low fidelity to high fidelity and get feedback along the way. So, question in the room.
Hello, my name is Eugene. I actually have a few questions, and you want me to, throw it all in a pile or on the...
Start with one.
Okay. So, like you first talked about the Dell design for game users, and Dell basically come up with the prefabricated PC.
Yes.
Which is like not going with the handmade.
It's absolutely true. Yes.
So, how does it work?
That was the best that they could do in their business model. So it was, what they found was there was a market for people who desired to be in that world but didn't have the technical skills to build their own, and that's who they were able to satisfy.
The other one is you showed us the exercises you gave to clients to kind of estimate the trade-offs that they're doing while designers do put in features and size and stuff. How do you make those clients to follow this exercise?
So that particular example was actually target consumers, not the clients, but we have done it with clients as well. How do we make them do it? We can't make them do it. They have to want to do it. So we do it when they ask us. So right now we're going through an exercise of, related to that brain surgery thing that I showed you, where that was actually a design that we did 5 years ago. The medical world is really slow. It's taken all of that time for the product to actually release, and we're working on the next generation, and we're working directly with them in brainstorming ideas, but it's because they asked us to. We certainly can't force them to.
Yeah. Maybe you have some...
Well, they've seen the positive outcome. So what we find is organizations, after they hire us, actually want us to come in and teach them how to do what we do. So, and what's your third question?
Yeah, and the last one was...
It's gone missing.
Okay, yeah.
That's okay, thank you. Yes.
So you said that it's difficult to get feedback from family and friends because they're
biased.
Yes. And it's also difficult to get feedback from people because they don't want to admit that they messed up.
Yes.
How do you
go about getting your accurate feedback? I'd like to know some techniques or...
Yeah, no, so it's a really good question. I don't think that anybody has ever done a good job of writing a book or a process that teaches you the art of how to structure unbiased questions, unfortunately. I mean, it's probably something that we should do, but that's really a technique that is really important that you learn over time. I mean, let's put it this way. I've gone into sessions from people testing within their own company, and literally the first thing that they say is they have somebody look at a product and they said, "Oh, that's really cool, huh?" That was the first thing that they said, right? So, you know, some of it is really being cognizant of how you're structuring your wording. You know, unfortunately, I don't have a magic bullet for you. It's something that we put a lot of work into, but there aren't a lot of good references. But, you know, it's the fact that people don't give you an accurate view, don't necessarily are not necessarily honest with you. There's a lot of ways of getting around that, like giving them post-test questionnaires where they can express their ideas without necessarily having to say it, for example. And we see disparities there and treat those as being more accurate. You can look at facial expressions where people can't give away the reality of what's going on, and we have a sense of how to discount some of those ratings. But those are more manageable than the bias, in my experience, from friends and family, that because those biases run really deep, just because there's love involved. Even if it's an association, you know, people are actually really wonderful that way. You know, it's a positive thing. It's just bad when you're looking for honest feedback about a product concept.
So even through the difficulties, stranger on the street better than family.
I would say stranger on the street is better because they don't have a vested interest. They'll just tell you. Thank you. And by the way, the kids you can sit down, sorry. Kids are the best, you know. I mean, when you test kids, boy, they'll let you know. I mean, one of my favorites was, you know, a 12-year-old sitting next to me looking at a product literally for maybe 10 seconds, and he said, "This sucks," and he got up and left, and that was the end of it. You know, they'll just tell you right off the bat, you know. So, do you have any questions online or any other questions in the room over here?
You do a lot of market research and things like that, and you just went on about that. Not, all right, that was bad connotation, but anyway, I'm trying to see how you value expert opinion as opposed to market research.
And what kind of expert? Like design expert or domain expert?
Someone that's been in the field for a while, whatever field you're
Well, so there's a lot of different experts. If you're dealing with a fashion website and you have an expert in fashion, I think there's a lot of deferral to that person's opinion in our minds. If you have somebody who's designed 8 million websites for selling toasters, and now they're on their 212th toaster website design, my guess is they have a pretty ingrained view of selling toasters that is not going to move the state of the art forward. And so in that case, we wouldn't put a lot of weight on the expertise that they may have. So it really depends on the situation. I mean, there's plenty of opinionated people, but they're different from the people who know what they're talking about, you know. And there's a lot of, unfortunately, so-called experts that if in the design field and the user experience field and usability, that if you really read their books, they're more critics than they are creative. And, you know, I think being creative is the hard part. Everybody can tear apart a design, you know. So I personally really try to get past the BS and understand where their expertise is really coming from. I don't know if that answers your question or not. But, okay, well, I'll augment it a little bit just by saying that we as a company do put a lot of faith in getting customer feedback because there's a lot of competing voices and vested interests that sometimes cloud what the right decision is. And we see our role for our clients of at least educating them about what their customers want, even though they may decide to go in a different direction. They should at least know what they're going to be facing. Do you have a question?
So, hi, I'm Peter. So first, I want to ask like how you measure the user reaction, and when do you actually measure it?
So that's also a good question, or all good questions. So we, when we're doing, let's say, usability testing, we have a series of metrics. Some of them may include time on task. We actually time people, how long it takes them. We also record a number of errors, for example. And sometimes, depending on the situation, we record when people wind up having to call support for some reason. That's a really costly thing for most companies, by the way. That's really the end of the road. So, a company to field a phone call, even in the best circumstances, costs them about $30. So if you buy a Fitbit for $50 and they've sold it to the retailer for $25, in one call they've already lost money, right? So achieving ease of use is critical. The other tool we use is scales and exercise. We ask people to rate things after tasks in a variety of different ways, whether in terms of ease of use, credibility, a bunch of other factors. And we collect, we typically give them a questionnaire at the end as well. So those, I don't consider those to be quantitative data. It's really, it's quantitative qualitative data. It gives us a sense of how to figure out the relative disparity, how strongly they feel. We don't treat it as a way of saying, okay, this is like 7 out of 7 and they love it. It's more 7 relative to 5. This is something that they like more than this other thing. We don't treat it as an absolute value.
So you started those kind of measurements from the beginning, or do you start at some point of the...
Yeah. So if we're going through cycles, we do it from the very beginning and we develop a baseline, especially if we're doing a redesign, so that we can measure progress all along the way. And sometimes we see slopes like this, things getting better. We see slopes like that, where we just can't mess with certain things. And we see things that go like that, where we've taken a design, we've made it better, and we changed to the point where we broke it, and we need to back it out. And that's one of the valuable tools, one of the value that you can get of collecting those metrics all along the way, is you can really see measurably whether your design is performing better in the end than when you started.
And when you started from like a fresh user experience design, do you have like any restrictions? Or
so even so, somebody comes to us and says, "Hey, we don't know what. We just need you to invent this thing." I mean, we go looking for those restrictions. So we ask if there are going to be technology requirements. So they've already decided, for example, it's going to be a native app no matter what for a mobile device, or is going to be a responsive design no matter what. Some of the fixed realities are going to be the customers and the tasks. If they're solving some problem, then those tasks exist in the world now. There's some level of status quo. So we do try to box it in by understanding from a technical standpoint what the restrictions are, from a business standpoint what needs to be achieved, and from a task standpoint, when the ultimate user is going to be using this, what the limitations are. So for example, a surgeon may be 6 feet away from a device. That immediately tells you how you're going to have to deal with typography and legibility and contrast, as opposed to a situation where somebody is going to be at a desktop and is going to be sitting in front of it. So we try to identify those right from the very beginning.
Also, the last question is like, when you are working for a website or app, like how do you decide like the right amount of the user customizability?
How much to... Yeah, so there's a bunch of limiting factors. One is time. Doing this kind of research is really time consuming, and some design cycles just can't allow it. The other one is budget. It's also expensive. You've got to pay participants to be part of the research. You need a moderator unless you're doing it kind of on your own. And so sometimes it's limited by budget. But mostly it's limited by, in our world, time to market. The decision has been made that they're going to put this product, come hell or high water, Q4 2015. And quite often we're put in a situation where we have to work backwards and say, okay, based on that, engineering is going to need final assets by this date, realistically, to be able to put them in and have a quality cycle. So that means we are left with this amount of time, and that amount of time we believe we could do this much feedback and be able to make it. So basically, we often have to work it backwards from the time to market shift.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions in the audience?
Hi, my name is Andrea. I have two questions. So first one, when you explain about the medical interface of like the brain surgery, can you like give a quick explanation of what's the process that you did
to get that that design? Okay, so we started by somebody was asking about experts. We went and talked to experts, and the experts were surgeons. In that particular case, they were neurosurgeons and neurologists. So we spent time going into clinics. We also spent time going into the operating room. A bunch of us at the company actually are certified to be able to go into operating rooms. And we go and see live surgery. In some cases, we see a procedure without a certain technology and with a technology. And we also, in that particular case, spent time with the patients to understand when they got through the whole process, how communication worked for them as well, and how they came back for visits, and how the information from the procedure flowed back, and how it was collected and everything else. So basically, we spent time with all of the touch points around the procedure, everywhere from the operating room to the clinic to the patient's home, and really understood the product from a holistic standpoint. And then we understood the business requirements, the technology requirements. In that particular case, we had to learn about Ohm's law and microamps and impedance and how that all reacts in the body and electromagnetic fields. So we basically had to become mini domain experts for driving microelectrodes into the human brain and how it works and doesn't work. So, I mean, that's one of the cool things about this kind of consultancy is you never know what you're going to become an expert in at any given moment. I mean, that we have to spend a lot of time educating ourselves in addition to talking to people.
My second question is that I guess when you want to show yourself in terms of portfolio, how do you show yourself without being too egoistical, like being too big-headed, but you still want to show your, I guess, special compared to anyone else?
Did you want to tackle that one?
Sure. Well, like always, the delicate balance. And, I mean, it's hard to say exactly what you could do to not cross that line. But I think the main focus is maybe instead of saying it with a bunch of words, being like, I'm so awesome because of this and this and this, kind of showing that through your projects and showing it in a targeted way where the projects that you show make a point. So if you're trying to say that I am good at ergonomics, if you are, let's say, an industrial designer, then your project should support that. And your project tells that story for you instead of you having to be like, this is a strength of mine, I'm really awesome at it, look at me, that kind of attitude. And by pairing that with things that might be more centered around your personality, like, let's say if you are a fun person or you like sports or something, and having that attached to maybe a sporting goods product and having your website or portfolio designed in an active wear kind of style, then it starts telling a very complete story about who you are. And it starts making you stand out a lot more than, let's say, if you had just put, I'm good at ergonomics and this is my project. So hopefully that is answered.
So just to add on to that, just as a hiring manager, part of what I look at is evidence of empathy. I mean, I love to see portfolios where it's not just, look, I was able to take all these pixels and look at these amazing things that I did. I want to see somebody that like was designing something for like desert survival. So they drove down the Mojave Desert and they hung out down there and have pictures of them with miners and dirty T-shirts and really lived the problem. That's something that's really impressive to me. The other thing is that I think a lot of the portfolios that I see, don't take this wrong, I consider them to be really fluffy. Like everybody does these really simple consumer problems of like, okay, this is how you hail a cab, and okay, this is how you message people in groups, and you do all of that stuff. There's some really difficult technological problems to solve, and you see some of the stuff that we've worked on. I mean, it's really refreshing to come across a portfolio where people have really tackled a really difficult problem, and maybe they haven't nailed it completely, but it's the try that really tells the story. It's not the outcome, not expecting a student to have shown that they designed, a complete solution to something, but it's really cool to see the attempt.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we're going to finish up with the last couple of questions online, if that works.
So here's a tough one for you.
It's for me?
Yes,
Uh-oh.
It's for you. So I've got to find it. Hold on. So Alexis Britt asks, Airbnb's new head of design stated he doesn't believe design-led companies work. Do you agree or disagree?
Do design-led companies work? I guess I'm going to have to agree with that, because I think design is a means to an end. Ultimately, there's art and there's design, right? And art is a self-expression, and it's beauty, and it's creating feelings in people. But design is how you apply art to solve a problem. And in a case like Airbnb, they're solving a business problem. So if you just approached it from a design point of view without leveraging the business need that they have, then they would fail. So I have to agree with that statement, having thought about it 10 seconds. Yes.
Okay, we have another question here that's easier to answer.
Okay.
Not so tough. So does UE Group utilize A/B testing and or heat maps in user testing?
So we, as a consultancy, it really is up to our clients in a way. We try to convince them to do things a certain way. So something like traditional A/B testing in a website is something that comes after our work. They take it, they put it on their servers, whether it's a staging server, what have you. We do A/B testing in the lab rather than in the real world, more often than not, where we do comparisons of different designs with people. I think another flavor of A/B testing is we do a lot of benchmarking as well. Sometimes one of the steps that we take when we are designing a website, for example, is we not only do testing on the website, but we do testing on the competitors' websites as well to understand what their strengths and weaknesses are. So we can really get a comparison of how people react to that website versus others that are similar in that area. And what was the second one besides A/B testing?
Like heat mapping?
Oh, heat mapping. Well, yeah, heat mapping, we've also used that to a certain extent, but to be honest, these days with HTML5, sites are so dynamic that just about every heat map package that's out there completely fails that in our experience, because it sees a bunch of heat map information, but it didn't interpret the fact that there was a pop-up that came up at a certain point, and that's where all of the presses were. So it's really flaky in our experience, so we have tended not to use it. I think it works really well in the most basic sites, but not the really complex sites that we see in responsive sites and that sort of thing. Yeah, that's what I would say about that. And also, I would say the same thing about eye tracking. It's not something that we typically use simply because it produces gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs of data that is not particularly interesting. I mean, it's just you see the track of people's eyes twitching across a screen, and it's sort of like trying to read tea leaves. What does this mean, you know? And it goes back to my comment about understanding the why and not the what. You know, you can look at logs all day, you can look at eye tracks, you can look at all of that stuff. It's not going to tell you what's in people's minds. And ultimately, that's where the good design lies, is understanding the whys and not the whats.
Thank you, guys. Big round of applause for Tony and Ashley of UE Group.
Yeah, and thank you guys for coming out tonight. That's great.